Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and today what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about Horary Astrology, and then I'm going to actually walk through the delineation of an actual Horary chart and just give you a sense of how I do it within the medieval Renaissance methodology. Horary astrology is a little bit mystifying to a lot of people. Essentially, in modern astrology, we're almost always dealing with natal charts. And people will typically, when it's not unusual for someone to ask a horary question, then go ahead and send me their natal chart, which we don't use for horary. And similarly, that the technique is different as well. The approach is different, and we're going to see that as we go through this. So basically what a horary question is, I mean, obviously a natal chart is a chart of the location of the planets at a specific time, date, and place at the time of your birth. Horary chart is different. Horary chart is the time that a question is possibly asked, but more accurately, according to William Lilly, who's the most famous Horary astrologer, he was a 17th century English astrologer, we use the time that the astrologer receives and understands the question. Okay, so this is the time of a question, not the time of a birth. Now that trips out a lot of people. They've never heard of it. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, particularly if you're in this atheistic materialistic view of how astrology works. If it's talking about beams, you can kind of see how the natal chart is a map of the beams from the planets at the time of your birth, and there's some kind of energy signature or something like that. Horary, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, the time of the receipt of a question or the time of asking a question, what kind of energy could that be? Now, the reason it works is because everything in the cosmos is patterned, everything is connected. A leaf doesn't fall without there being, a corresponding pattern that goes along with it. So what we're seeing with the horary question is, and again, people ask me, they'll say, well, why aren't you using the time that I asked the question? It's my question. In reality, it's the cosmos's question. And what we're doing is we're aligning with that question. And so in order to do a horary, you need to have a question that really matters to you. It has to be very important to you. And if you have this emotional attachment, if it's important to you, then you're in tune with the planet, so to speak. Really what you're in tune with is this underlying spiritual cycles that the planets reflect so well. In order to ask a horary question, you obviously have to have the question, and then you have to ask the astrologer. It's not really manifesting. It's not really real. It's like a confession. It's not really real until you actually ask the question. You haven't really manifested that question properly. And so that kind of completes the circuit. You've got the emotional desire to know the answer. It's in tune with the cycles, spiritual cycles that are reflected by the heavens, and then you actually ask it, and that's when the question really manifests. That's when the chart is going to be accurate for that question. So if you look at horary versus natal astrology, horary is very much like having a microscope or a laser beam because it's very much restricted to the scope of the question. So for example, someone will say, will I marry X? And then we can answer that question based on the horary. So what about Y? You need to ask a separate question for that. So natal charts, on the other hand, it's essentially like, if you think about it, the same natal chart is going to be true whether you've just born or you're 90 years old. And there's a lot of difference between a newborn and a 90-year-old. So it has to have a lot more flex. It has to have a lot more, ability to cover lots of different areas, or like I said, basically be flexible. And I've had people say to me, kind of like disapprovingly, I'll do a natal reading for them. I'll say, well, that used to be true. It's like, well, there you go. I mean, we nailed that in terms of personality. Well, I'm not like that anymore. I mean, I think they hope they're not like that anymore for negative qualities. But again, this is in the nature of the natal chart. It's almost like being at 30,000 feet. It's a very wide angle, whereas the horary is very precise. Now, horary also, because it's traditional astrology, medieval Renaissance astrology, this is true of medieval Renaissance natal astrology as well, tends to be very much more focused and concrete than modern astrology. It's not abstract, it's not fuzzy, it's not new age. Tends to be very concrete. I mean, even in a natal chart, you can say, well, you're going to have financial success from this particular kind of thing. You're going to have financial losses from this sort of thing. And that's even more so in horary. Horary is very, very focused on concrete events. So for example, in a relationship question, people are also asking me, oh, does he love me? What are his feelings about me? That's something that horary doesn't answer very well. But will I have a committed relationship with this person? Yes, that's concrete. We can see that outwardly. That's very obvious, and that's something that the horary can pick up well. Again, we're looking for something concrete. And the other thing I would say about asking horary questions is they really need to be very focused. Um, and so if you have a question that can be answered yes or no, that's a good way of focusing the question. If you have a situation where you have this very open-ended question, if there's, like, where should I move? Not a good horary question. Or should I move to LA or Boston or New York? Again, not a good horary question because it's so open-ended. Another thing that horary doesn't do very well and basically can't do is hypothetical questions. So if I do X, then will Y happen? Or if I do X, what will happen? It's too hypothetical. And again, if you're talking about when you're going to move to someplace, I mean, you could potentially say, oh, will I move to New York? And then, wait a day or so and ask, will I move to Boston? And then wait a day. The problem with that is that when you keep basically, you're not far enough along in your decision-making process to ask the definitive yes or no question. And so if you ask a lot of questions that are kind of circling around it, you're going to get confusing. And that happens as well. Sometimes they say you can't ask the same question again. It is possible to ask the same question again. You don't want to ask it immediately afterwards because you're looking for a different answer. You don't like the first answer, so you're going to try to ask it again or ask some sort of variation on it. That also becomes problematic in terms of asking a horary question. You ask related questions, and you're going to start getting confusing, contradictory answers. It's just inevitable. I mean, people get obsessed though with these areas, and they'll want to kind of pick away at it, and that leads to confusion. So, and I think this is not just true of horary, but also any kind of divination. And I notice it myself. I tend to do I Ching just kind of for myself. And what you want to do with that is respect the oracle. Okay. You want to ask a serious question. You want to, and then you don't overthrow it. If it's not the answer you're looking for, you don't just turn around and try to find some way to get out of it or ignore it or whatever. You respect that. That's the best way you're going to get accurate answers and the best way you're going to get usable stuff out of any type of divination. And that is what Horary Astrology is. It's a type of, and in fact, any astrology, if it's used in the predictive manner, is a technique of divination. The other thing about horary that I've become increasingly aware of, and I emphasize this to clients, and why I always want to have people send me the question first. I mean, if you can see the link there for Horary Astrology on my website, if you want to have me do a horary for you, I always want to have you send me the question first. Please don't order and then send me the question, okay? Because the question might not be appropriate for horary. There might be problems with it, and refunds are really complicated and expensive for me to do. So check first as far as that. And I can help you formulate the question as well. If you're having difficulty, I can help you get the question into a form that's askable, or we can figure out maybe you're not ready to ask the question. But one of the key things we want to do with horary is asking what I call the root question, really the underlying question. And this comes up not untypically a lot of times with relationship questions. And what people will do is, the real question is, will I have a committed relationship, or will I marry X? Will I marry this particular person? They're obsessed with this person, they have a relationship with them, or they want to date them or whatever, and that's really what the ultimate goal is. That's what they're looking for. But instead of asking that question, they'll ask things like, will X contact me? And the beauty of that for them is that if it's yes, okay, that's hopeful, because then if he'll contact me, then I might be able to have a relationship. But if they say no, well, just because he's not going to contact me doesn't mean I'm not going to have the relationship. So a lot of times when people are not really ready to ask the root question, they'll ask, like I said, sort of nibble around the edges, or ask these sort of, tertiary questions. And so that's something that's important to do. Again, if you want an accurate question, you need to ask the root question. I think that's it gives a sort of a little bit of a more basic introduction. Part of this is the fact that horary, again, what people will do is they're used to modern natal, and they use that for everything. So again, if they're going to be they've heard of Horary Astrology, they'll just try to go ahead and use modern natal techniques for that. And even people that are, traditional astrologers. I had a traditional astrologer once who was a real natal expert and was trying to do horary, and again, using traditional natal, and it's different. It has a different approach. I mean, even things like, for example, like the technique. In horary, there's a huge difference between a separating and applying aspect. An applying aspect is going to tend to show current or future things. It's going to tend to be effective in getting things done. Separating is going to tend to show the past or things that are ineffective unless you're trying to get rid of things. So there's a huge difference between a separating and applying aspect. Whereas in natal, even in medieval Renaissance natal, there's really not a huge difference between a separating or applying aspect in terms of how you're going to read it. So again, got to recognize there's a difference in the technique, and not try to just use whatever technique you have for both. And then also there's a huge difference between modern and traditional astrology. Now, one of the things that the medieval Renaissance horary points up is, the about it's predictive stuff, and so in reality, a lot of modern astrology is not used predictively. Okay, what we're doing with it is it's for reassurance. And again, I'll get people asking me questions like I had one, like within a day or so ago. It's like, when is all this bad stuff going to stop? Okay, they're upset, they're worried, and so they're looking to astrology as a way to feel better, to reassure them, for someone to say everything's going to be okay, it's all going to go your way. Just hold on. Now, how accurate that is that in terms of, that's fine, like as a friend or psychological counseling or whatever. But in terms of predictive techniques, really not something that's really a good way of approaching a prediction, because in a prediction, there's always a possibility of yes and a possibility of no. And when you say, when will I, you're assuming you're going to get a positive answer, and that's never something you can do in a predictive, and particularly in a horary setting. It's funny, I have a horary casebook that has a lot of examples, just like I'm going to do now, in terms of showing delineations. And one of the criticisms that somebody made of it was there's too many negative answers there. It's like, as if it's the fault of the astrologer and that I'm not doing a very good job as an astrologer because I'm not reassuring people, I'm not giving them positive answers. That's what their job is to give people positive answers. The reality is, if you're worried about something, you may have a reason for being worried about it. And if things are not going your way, they may well continue not to go your way. So, I mean, an excellent example of that is people ask me, when will I get a job? Again, they're freaked out. They've been unemployed for a while. They need that job. When's it going to happen? Well, Horary's only looking at about a year. And so it may be that you're not going to get a job within a year. So these you just have to be ready for both a yes or no answer. And I think that's true. Again, I take that with my own use of oracles with the I Ching. I'm typically asking things like, what's the current situation? So if I get a negative, it's like, okay, today's going to be a slow day. I'm not going to do any business today or whatever. But, that's just, you just have to be ready for that. And, understand that what we're focused on here is giving an accurate prediction. And people say, yes, I want an accurate prediction, but I want that accurate prediction to go my way. That's kind of a mind game with yourself. Again, you got to be ready for both a yes or a no in terms of the answer. So, like I said, essentially to do a horary, you need a serious issue. I mean, typically, since people are having to pay me to do these, I don't get unserious. I've occasionally had people ask me a question that was not serious, but they still wanted to pay me, which is odd. That's going to be a problem in terms of getting a good chart. Sometimes if you're asking the same question, like I said, that's one of the reasons you wouldn't want to ask the same question again, because that emotional intensity isn't there. That's also going to be problematic in terms of the accuracy. But relationship questions are really great because people care about them a lot. But anything you really care about, it's got a concrete thing. So, for example, will I marry X? Will I have a committed relationship with them? Will I get the job at X corporation? I've interviewed for the job. I want to know if I'm going to get the job. Am I going to be fired? Am I going to stay? Things like that. House buying questions. Should we buy this particular house? Will our house sell? These are all really good questions in terms of they're important, it's something that people care about, and also they're pretty concrete. So as you're going to see when I do the reading, I have a very specific way I do it. I am in the Olivia Barclay, the QHP lineage. Olivia Barclay was an English astrologer. She trained with Gilbert Navarro and Ivy Goldstein Jacobson in modern horary, which is getting more in the direction of the predictive stuff than modern natal. She found a copy of William Lilly's Christian Astrology. This was published in 1647. It has nothing to do with Christianity. The only reason he put Christian astrology on it was because he was getting hassled about astrology being demonic, and he wanted to kind of, there's really nothing Christian about it. People get all upset about that. People have been burned by Christianity, so they think this is bad. Really has zero to do with Christianity. It was just sort of, camouflage for him. But anyhow, this book is really amazing. This is kind of the Bible of horary astrology. And Olivia Barclay got this and started working from it, and then she started teaching other people. So, for example, people like John Frawley or Lee Lehman or Deb Holding or Sue Ward, these are all students of Olivia Barclay and all have students of their own now. And it's gone on this whole lineage. So I studied with Lee Lehman. I was very privileged to be able to study with somebody who was expert as a Horary astrologer, had a lot of practical experience with it, who taught me. Um, and the reason, one of the things I think that the term traditional astrology now has been very much expanded. It used to just apply to horary. It's now been expanded up pretty much, everything other than modern. But one of the reasons it had so much prestige is because you've got this really excellent technique that's being done very similarly by most of the people in that lineage. I mean, whether you go to John Fry or Lee Lehman or Deb Holding or me or whatever, you're going to get probably 80% of a similar usage of technique. Um, you're also going to get working on a question that you don't know the answer to. Okay, because if someone comes to you and they're hiring you to do a horary question, they don't know the outcome. So you're going to do that, and then you can check the outcome. You can see whether it was accurate or not. So having that, checking the outcome, making a concrete prediction, and then having the outcome be checkable, and then getting feedback back is really the ultimate in terms of checking whether or not you're really doing the prediction accurately. And any divination you could do that for. You have to have a situation where you don't know the outcome, then you'd make a record of what your prediction was, and then when you got the results back, then you could check it. And that's what I really advocate for Horary astrology, for natal astrology, and then for any kind of divination. And if you do that, you know that you're really doing it correctly, that you're actually making predictions. However, what I would say is that about 99% of modern astrology is basically non-predictive. Like I said, what people are doing is they already know the outcome, and they're looking at the chart, like Hitler's chart or Einstein's chart. We know what happened already, and we'll look at the chart, and you can make it basically come out any way you come out. I did an example of this in one of my discussion groups. I posted this chart, had Scorpio rising, it was like 1880 or something, had Scorpio rising, had a lot of planets in the 8th house. It's looking kind of ominous, and I said, this is Jack the Ripper's chart. And people were like, oh yeah, Jack the Ripper's chart. And there's all these things about how, a serial killer. And I said, oh, actually, this is Gandhi's chart. And the reaction to that was kind of dumbfounded silence. And one person said, oh yeah, Gandhi's like a serial killer. And the point being that if you know what the outcome is, you can make any chart fit it. Okay? The only way to know that you're actually predicting, you're actually doing anything, is to have a situation where you don't know the outcome. In Horary, again, in a client-based situation, you're almost always going to have a situation where you're doing that. You're not looking back. If you're looking, people say, oh, but for practice, it's good for practice. It's like, no, it's not. You're not practicing anything. If you already know the outcome, then you're just, endlessly doing hindsight, and it's not doing any good. And so that's something that I think a lot of what the prestige of traditional astrology comes from, the fact that this QHP school is so good and the predictions are so accurate. You've got this great technique, and you've got a group of people that are very experienced at it, doing it repeatedly and getting better and better with practice. And I think that brings up another issue. Again, the tendency in modern astrology is to regard all techniques in any type of astrology, any school, modern, Hellenistic, Vedic, whatever, is like Tinker Toys or Legos. They're all interchangeable. And you just get this big box and you open it up, and you can, if you want to get the spaceship Lego set and you've got the dragon Lego set, you can take them apart and put them together, and you've got some other thing you can make up. Everything's interchangeable, everything fits together. And that's really not how the traditional schools would have looked at it. Think of it more as a language. Each of the individual techniques works together. It's like taking the words out. Like if you take the nouns from German and the verbs from French and the adjectives from English and put them together, you're just going to have a mishmash. You're not going to have anything that makes any sense at all. And so having this set of techniques that work together as a methodology is really key. And also this idea that you can just make it up yourself. I'm really not inventing anything. Essentially what you find with medieval Renaissance astrology is that you have 50 different techniques that you could potentially use that are provided in the sources, and what you end up doing as an individual astrologer, and when you finally get to the point of mastery, is picking certain techniques and have a different focus. So for example, John Frawley has a different focus than I do as far as some of the specific techniques he uses. And I have stuff they're different from how he does it, but not wildly different. It's idiosyncratic, but it's nothing that's outside the tradition. We're not making stuff up, and we're not importing stuff in that doesn't make any sense or doesn't come out from the traditional sources that we're working from. But what we're trying to do is, and this is where I think it's where I sort of depart from some of the people that do medieval Renaissance, is this idea that the techniques work themselves. So even within a medieval Renaissance with a Christian astrology or whatever, that somehow I could put these all in a computer and the computer would pop back the answer. Even AI, somehow I could do it that way. What I find is that in any type of divination, there's a continuum between the amount of intuition of the diviner, of the astrologer, if you're using astrology, and the technique. So if you're talking about a psychic, they have a minimal amount of technique and a maximal focus on the intuition of the psychic. If you get something like tarot reading or I Ching, you've got more technique, but you still have a major focus on technique on intuition. Medieval Renaissance astrology, you have probably the maximum amount of technique that is going to be applied in a divination setting. There's tens of thousands of pages of books, all sorts of potential techniques that can be used. But nevertheless, the ultimate answer is going to be given to you by intuition. And there's the Centiloquium, which is a set of aphorisms, these sort of short sayings attributed to Ptolemy. So aphorism 1 basically says, look, you can only get so far based on technique. And in order to get the answer correct, you're going to have to basically be divinely inspired. You have to be an oracle. Again, you have to use your intuition. And so an example of that would be, if I'm looking at a relationship chart, and I look at the 7th house, which signifies the person that's the potential, person in the relationship that the Aquarian is asking about. And the ruler of the 7th house, which again signifies that person and gives you a sense of the strength or weakness of this planet, shows the strength or weakness of the person. If that planet is afflicted, then I'm going to say the person is either unable, unwilling, or unsuitable for the relationship. And those are essentially the choices that we have potentially. Now, which of those it's going to be, we're only going to know through potentially from other factors, but often through intuition, through putting together the factors in the chart. And ultimately, again, not only do the factors not work themselves, but they don't work individually. And so people will ask me, what does, moon in the first house mean? And my answer, it's a little flip, but it's actually true, is it doesn't mean anything. It always depends on the context. And it's sort of like saying, what does love mean? Well, again, it depends on the context that you're asking about that. It really, it's such a broad, concept and has such a different meaning. You're going to have to depend on the specific circumstances to see what it actually means. So what we're doing in the chart is not breaking it down to the smallest little pieces, and then we get the invariant meaning based on that little piece, that little analytical technique. But we're looking at everything together, and we're looking through the chart to try to see the underlying spiritual patterns, really that govern all things and all events on Earth. And the cycles of the heavens are very regular, so they reflect those underlying spiritual patterns. So that's really what we're doing is synthesis. We're not breaking down an analysis, we're putting it together, we're pattern forming. And again, that's where the intuition comes in, is that, and I would say with Horary, even if you're a graduate of my course or, a course, by someone like, Lee Lehman or Deb Holding or whatever, or the Sue Ward, John Frawley, even if you've learned the techniques, you're going to have to do it time and time again. I would say you'd probably, I don't know, who knows, you can't put an arbitrary number on, but 50, 100 charts before you're even going to start to be, getting close to mastery. And that's not charts where you don't know the outcome. That's someone who's asking a question, we don't know the outcome, and again, they come back. So one of the things that I do that's unusual is, again, it seems like invariable, every time, people always kind of go, I want to set up an appointment, and then we're going to talk on Zoom or whatever, or talk on the phone. I don't work that way. For me, in order for me to really focus and concentrate, I really need to write the answer. And so what I'm going to do, again, when we do the chart is I've got the printed out copy of the analysis that I did. I'm going to kind of walk through that written analysis. But if you got a Horary question done for me, you would email me your question. Okay, I would check it, and then you'd order, and then what I do is go ahead and do the analysis, write it out, and then I email that to you. And then in terms of discussion of it, what you want to focus on, again, with me, is not the astrology. Don't try to reverse engineer it, or this is not I don't do mini seminars in Horary. If you want to learn Horary, you need to take the course that I have, and you can see a link to that. But what you want to do is focus on the practical questions and say, okay, well, this, am I going to, this person, you said they seem to be that they're aggressive. I'm like, back and forth as far as try to get practical information. And don't focus on the astrology. And again, that's another thing people do is they'll start freaking out because I do put all the technique in there. They'll start flipping out. I don't understand this. It's like, you really don't need to do that. It's in there in plain English. Just go with the stuff in plain English, and the final analysis is going to really kind of sum it all up. So what I decided to do was to, again, walk through, I'll put the chart up and then just walk through this Horary analysis. And then you can just see how I do it. And then this is one where I got the results back, and you can see how accurate that was in terms of the results that came back. But I think it's very interesting to see the interaction of the technique and intuition. It's also interesting to see the medieval Renaissance technique in action, and also interesting to see how, I mean, I've done probably 5,000 horary questions for clients, and just to see how somebody who's really kind of, has a master of the subject does. Now, again, you could have somebody else who would look at this chart and have a different methodology to it. But they're going to come up with, if they're on the nose, if they've got their intuition and everything lined up, they're going to get the same basic answer. But you could come about it from a lot of different ways. So it's not as if there's a specific way. And again, that's one of the things in my horary course is that, occasionally I'll get people that can mimic what I'm doing, but that's not the point of the course. The point of the course is to get in there, learn these techniques, and then develop your intuition, and then develop your own sort of idiosyncratic methodology within, again, the tradition that allows you to come up with these accurate answers. Because it's only, as I said, the combination of the selection of, which techniques work for you, and which techniques are kind of help channel your intuition. At the same time, it's not just making it up. It's not like, oh, it's just psychically coming to me, and it takes a lot of study to learn the techniques, and then, but also the intuition comes into it. So I think that's sort of unique. I don't see that coming from anybody else. It's either thought of as, like I said, being basically psychic, and you just make it up as you go along, and you're not even really making predictions because that's a little too daunting. We don't want, because you might get it wrong, or just looking at Hitler's chart, or it's 100% technique and the techniques work by themselves. So again, like I said, it's a combination of both technique and intuition, and so I think, again, you'll find it interesting as I go through the chart. Okay, so this is a horary question chart. You can see that this is the time of the question that I received the question. You can see it's got my location, which is here, Iowa City, Iowa, and then this is the date and time that I received and understood the question. And so the question was, will the overseas job go forward? And so basically my process for doing these is I sort of mechanically go through the specific factors that are potentially applicable depending on the question. And then as I'm doing that, the chart really starts to speak to itself. So one of the things that's really important to recognize with horary is this is not like natal. In natal, every single bit of the chart's important and everything's meaningful. And particularly in a modern natal setting, you can just start making stuff up too. You can just start bopping around. And whatever pops out at you, you just start thinking about and talking about as being meaningful. And more or less it will be, or you'll make it meaningful if you want to do that. Not so in horary. In horary, and this is also true of electional astrology, only certain parts of the chart are going to be relevant. And one of the main ways we're going to determine what's relevant in the chart is from the relevant houses. So the first house, this is the ascendant here, 5, Sagittarius is the ascendant. The first house and the ruler of the first house always signify the querent, the person who's asking the question. So in this case, so 5 Sagittarius rises. The querent is going to be signified by Jupiter, and you can see Jupiter here is dignified by triplicity, and also you can see up here the essential dignities by triplicity and term in the fourth house. And then we also look at the moon as a significator of action. The moon here is peregrine, and is also conjunct the fourth house. And then finally, we're going to be asking about the job. So the job or employer that we're asking about is going to be signified by the ruler of the 10th house in this case, which is Mercury. And notice here that Mercury is doubly afflicted. Mercury is retrograde, and Mercury is also combust. You can see that Mercury is within 3 degrees of the sun. Now, I don't follow Lily in saying that if it's in a different sign, it's not combust. I just do it purely by degrees. So Mercury is definitely within 8.5 degrees of the sun. So I consider Mercury in this situation to be combust. You could do it a different way if you wanted to. Again, this is one of those things that you could, you have to find out through your use of the technique and whatever. But that's the method that I apply. Same thing with out of sign aspects. I don't worry about whether aspects are out of sign or not in terms of ignoring them. So as we're looking at this, we've got a situation where the querent is in good shape, being dignified +5 by triplicity and term, and yet the employer and job, this overseas job that they've been offered, is definitely is got some problems because it's afflicted. So let's look also in terms of aspects. Let's see here. If you look at the aspects of the moon applies to conjoin Mars, and then sextiles Mercury within 10 degrees. It's kind of at the edge, but still, we can still consider it of Mercury, who's the job employer, and then the Mercury, which is the job employer, you can see separates from Jupiter, which is the significator of the querent. Okay, so that's all very interesting stuff, useful. Those are the main tools we're going to be looking with. So we're not going to be jumping off and looking at the 12th house. We're not going to be looking at, the part of fortune or whatever in this particular situation. We're not looking at all the other planets. Unless it's a house ruler or in a relevant house or aspecting a house ruler, that's relevant. We're really not going to be looking at the chart. So as we're looking at this, we can immediately set up a theme here. It's like, okay, so Jupiter, the significator of the querent, is very strong. What this means is, you basically are in a situation to have some influence over the flow of events. It doesn't mean you get what you want, though. But if you don't get what you want, you're generally going to be in a good situation. But it also can indicate that the person wants the job. If they're that strong, they're going to be, wanting the job or desiring to have it fairly strongly. Jupiter's in the fourth. That signifies the home. That could mean you're staying where you are, because the person was wondering where they're going to get this overseas job, or they're going to be moving. Jupiter in the fourth could well indicate you're staying where you are. The moon shows action. Moon's not either dignified or afflicted. It's just peregrine. It's weak, so it's not giving us a strong indication either positively or negatively. Moon is also conjunct the fourth, so that again might kind of point us towards staying where you are. Okay, so the key thing here, I think, is the state of the 10th ruler. So there's a 10th is ruled by Mercury, and again, so we notice here Mercury is both retrograde and combust. Basically, just being that severely afflicted is going to indicate a couple different things. As far as the job itself has definitely got problems. If the 10th ruler is afflicted, that can show problems with the job. It also can show that you don't even get the job in the first place, or there's problems with the employer. It's signifying both the job and the employer. So that much affliction is showing problems with the job or problems with the employer. Combustion can show stress, particularly with a boss. Can show secrecy or hidden things. I mean, there could be that there's things about the situation that the querent's not seeing, problems that are not being seen. Retrograde shows obstacles, delays, unpredictable change, unreliability, going in the wrong direction, bad decisions. So these are all possibilities in terms of what that could show. So definitely big question mark, big problems with the job. Now, the moon eventually sextiles Mercury, which signifies a job employer, which shows positive contact. It even could possibly show working at the job. However, Mercury separates from Jupiter. That's a significator of the querent, and that's negative for either getting a job or working at the job. And then Mercury squares Saturn. Saturn's, in this case, a square Saturn's in good shape, but a square is not a positive aspect. Really, that could also show problems for the employer if there's the square there. Again, I'm reading off this is what I did in advance, not looking at the chart afterwards, but the actual reading that I gave to the client. And I said, the chart is telling us that you might have some positive contact with the employer, or you might actually work at the job, but I think it's more likely that the job falls through. I said, this is probably a good thing because the job can be problematic. And so had a little bit of back and forth with the querent, and they said, from your analysis, does it indicate that I'm not getting the job to the employer and I'm staying where I am? Is that correct? And I said, what I would say the most likely outcome, though the job is going through, that the most likely outcome is you don't get the job, though it's also possible that you could you could get the job. I said, if the job goes through, however, it looks problematic and it might not last. So then the response to that was the querent said, your analysis was correct. I left overseas for the job, and then after a month of work, the job was changed and I had to resign. So again, you can see how the chart really reflected that. This wasn't a, it's like it wasn't a long-lasting job. You had the contact, was shown by the aspect, but the underlying problems with the job were enough that it didn't work. And so I think this shows a couple things. First of all, again, that is the actual analysis that I gave to the querent before I knew what was happening. Okay, and that ended up being accurate, and not just in a like yes no kind of situation that could kind of be, you could kind of guess at it, but that was enough accuracy and showing enough of the details that you can see that the chart really did correspond to the situation, and as well my analysis was able to correspond to it too. And so I think that's useful in getting a sense of how much technique is used and how much intuition is used. What I'm trying to get is an underlying, underlying patterning there. And what you want to avoid doing as an astrologer is being, for example, worried about what trying to get a positive answer or trying to force the chart in a particular direction. And you really want to let the chart speak to you and let the underlying patterning come through with this. And so again, what I think is useful about this is that I did this analysis in writing before I knew the outcome, and then when I got the results back, I wrote the results down. So I have a permanent record of it. And like I said, I've probably got 5,000 charts, every single one for clients. I've got the analysis, and then results back, maybe, I don't know, 500 or so of those I've gotten results back on, which is very useful to know. And I don't always get it right. I'm not 100%, obviously not 100% accurate. So what's your percentage of accuracy? I really couldn't say. It's certainly better than guessing, but I certainly do my best on every single question I can to do the thing. Sometimes people email me, they're upset that I didn't get it right, and it's sort of like, that's a little strange to me. It's like, I'm definitely trying my best, and it's not going to ever be 100%, but so goes it. I hope that was useful. I think it's interesting to see how the process is done and get a sense of how I do horary questions. If you're interested, like I said, in having a horary question done for you, you can see the link there for horary questions. You can email me with a contact. Like I said, start off, send me your potential question, or I can help you work through it. And then once we've got a question that works, I can take the chart, and then you can order the horary. If your appetite here is whetted, if you're like, wow, this is really cool, I'd like to be able to predict the future accurately myself, then check out my Horary Astrology course. And this is a complete course. And again, what we're doing in this is we're always going to be working with charts that we don't know the outcome. It's really focused on learning how to predict, and we're not doing any hindsight astrology at all. We're not looking at old charts. And in fact, even when I get the results back, I don't typically spend a lot of time looking at the chart, because again, that doesn't help me. Once I already know the outcome, once I already know what's going to happen, it really sort of poisons my view in terms of trying to do a prediction. So, I'm like I said, very much focused on predictive astrology, even though that itself is out of the mainstream. So I think it's interesting to see this as a difference from what you're used to as doing modern. It's a difference from what you're doing as natal. And I think it's different from what other people are doing in terms of the methodology in a lot of ways. So interesting. Other ways are not wrong. This is just how I do it. But I think it's sort of interesting to see how I walk through the horary question. So I hope you find that interesting and useful and illuminating, and I hope you're inspired to ask horary questions and to study horary astrology.